Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you aren't. I am EDJ, and we are going to be watching another battle from, Historia Civilis. So, yeah, last time we saw the Gallic revolt, the first steps, Legion was wiped out essentially. So obviously now we're kicking things up to the final stage of the Gallic wars, yeah, we're gonna be covering another battle, so let's watch these, bloodthirsty cubes kill each other to death. Oh man. I do love this. I do love his telling, by the way. After watching Kings and Generals, I am enjoying this series as well a lot. I like it because I feel like I have a better grasp on the life and exploits of Caesar. And yeah, I love both these channels, like Kings and Generals and Historia Civilis. They're both so just really great. Some of the best historical, educational content on here. And they make history, like, even funner to look at, So, I don't know. Nothing but praise for these two. Let's get to it, shall we? Without any further ado.
Video was sponsored by the Great Courses Plus. Three basic facts defined Marcus Licinius Crassus's life. First, he was rich, a billionaire by our standards. Second, he used that wealth to support great politicians. I've talked before about how he was secretly funneling money to Clodius behind the scenes, but before that he did the same thing with Caesar and other populists before him. Third, Crassus's entire career was marked by his rivalry with Pompey.
Wow.
It started decades earlier, when Pompey took credit for a war that Crassus had won, and over the years, the grievances piled up. And yet, time and time again, circumstance forced the two men to work together. That brings us to their second consulship together in 55 B.C.E. Late in the year, Crassus was getting ready to leave Rome and head to Syria for his 5-year term as governor. It was an open secret that once Crassus got to Syria, he intended to go to war against the Parthians. On the day of his departure, a crowd confronted him, led by a tribune of the plebs. The tribune tried to use his veto to stop Crassus from leaving the city, but another tribune stepped forward and vetoed his veto. The crowd blocked his way and accused him of...
I love it when they, double veto each other, because it's like the equivalent of using an Uno reverse card and just canceling each other out. I love Uno. Uno's fun. Sorry. Let's get back to it.
Going to war for his own personal greed. They refused to let Crassus pass until Pompey showed up and calmed everybody down. I'm sure Crassus found it super annoying that it was Pompey who had to rescue him. One more grievance. Add it to the list.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, I did not know, obviously, when we learned about Crassus funding Clodius and Clodius exiling Cicero and Cicero being cool with Pompey, so that makes Pompey hate Clodius. Obviously I was like, I wonder if this is gonna, affect their relationship, but apparently their relationship has always kind of been strained. So this is a new perspective on the two of them now that I'm happy to have now that I feel like I'm understanding. Yeah, these guys always had grievances with each other, it seems. So, yeah, just super interesting to learn about,
Crassus arrived in Syria early and started to get everything ready for his unprovoked war against the Parthian Empire. In the spring...
Yeah, Crassus dies to the Parthians. I remember Kings and Generals covering that yeah, he dies fighting these dudes, so, I guess in his quest for glory or power or whatever, he, ultimately just got himself killed. So yeah, unfortunately.
Crassus took command of his legions and marched east. His son, Publius, had come from Gaul with some Gallic cavalry, and was now serving as Crassus's cavalry commander. The army reached the Euphrates River, which marked the border between Roman Syria and Parthian Mesopotamia. He crossed the river, and just like that, Crassus had started a war with the Parthians. Many of the nearby settlements had sizable Greek populations, and were reasonably friendly towards Rome. As Crassus approached with his army, many of them felt comfortable surrendering to the Romans without a fight. But it wasn't always so easy. One city, named Zenodatium, sent a friendly message to Crassus, asking for a Roman garrison. Crassus sent 100 men, basically a Roman sentry, to occupy the city. When the Romans arrived, the locals ambushed them and had them arrested. Later, the entire century was executed.
Dang.
When Crassus discovered what happened, he showed up with his entire army. He stormed the city and sold its inhabitants into slavery. For the rest of the summer, he marched all over Mesopotamia, capturing settlements and installing Roman garrisons. At the end of the season, he turned his army around and marched back to Syria. In all, his campaign was a success. He left 8,000 Roman soldiers behind, scattered throughout Mesopotamia in small garrisons, guarding his new conquests. But one thing should have been bothering him. So far, the Parthians had not responded. That winter, the king of Armenia, who was an ally of Rome, came to see Crassus. The king asked Crassus to consider invading through Armenia rather than through Mesopotamia. He said that going through the mountains would give the Roman infantry a huge advantage against the Parthian cavalry. If he agreed, the king promised to provide Crassus with an additional 30,000 infantry and 16,000 cavalry.
Wow, he's really selling this, huh? Like, yeah, it almost seems like, why wouldn't you agree to this? Like, oh, we negate their cavalry, which is a great source of their strength, and you're just gonna give me all that? I'm it. Then again, I'm not a military man, I probably get myself killed. But I guess we'll see what Crassus has done. Because I know he dies, I just don't know the specifics of how he died, what events led up to it, what decisions, so we'll see.
Would basically double the size of his army. This isn't explicitly said in our sources, but I'm sure that in return, the Armenian king wanted a slice of Crassus's conquests. Crassus thought about it, but in the end, he refused.
What?
His objective was to annex Mesopotamia, and so far that was going pretty well.
I see. He wasn't gonna try to go too deep. Man, I would agree. I've been like, heck yeah, give me all those men. You know? I will be needing them now. Then again, like I said, I'm not a military man, guys. I never want to act like I know better than any of these men, you know? I guess armchair general here. I would do, like, obviously I have no, I love learning about the exploits of Alexander the Great, Hannibal, Napoleon. I'm interested in tactics, how wars were fought, mainly older wars, not modern wars. I don't know crap about modern warfare, but you know, essentially, yeah, I've studied this a lot of my life, on and off. I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means, it's interesting to me, and heck, I've even used it in, like, D&D campaigns when telling of wars and NPCs, just borrowing from what I've learned from, like, all these geniuses, but, so, you know, I'm a nerd for that, and all of this, but still, it's like when you're a fan of a sport, but you don't play it, right? It's kind of like, yeah, but I don't want to act like I know better than any of these guys. I'm just speaking from, I guess I'm trying to put myself into this situation. What would I do if I were there at that time? Without hindsight and everything, yeah, I would have agreed with this man, you know, but that's what I would have done. Obviously, I don't know if I make it long, but I'd agree with this king and be like, awesome, you know, that sounds great, that sounds fantastic, thank you, you know. But I guess, you know, I don't think I have a makings of a general, so.
Our ancient sources all think that this was a stupid decision, and I can't say that I disagree. 46,000 Armenians is...
Okay. Well, I feel a little bit better about myself. There are times where I'm like, let me put myself, what would General Edwin do? And then I end up finding out I'm making the wrong decisions. But once in a while, I think I make a right call. So I'm happy to see that I would have not made what's apparently what a lot of people think is a dumb decision. But obviously the objectives were different, right? Like, he didn't want to conquer all of Parthia. He just wanted that spot, and he was doing well, so I guess I can see Crassus's point of view. But yeah, I don't know, just getting a larger army just sounds good to me, but that's just me.
a lot of Armenians. Nevertheless, the Armenian king returned home, and the next year, Crassus crossed the Euphrates again with 43,000 men.
Amazon is overcharging you, but I can show you how to avoid it. Don't spend another dime on Amazon.
So far, Crassus had made an effort to stay close to the Euphrates River, but one day, Crassus's scouts came across signs of an army marching away from the river into the desert. This must be the Parthian response. Some of Crassus's subordinates advised him to pull back into one of his garrisoned towns and gather some intelligence on this mysterious army. But Crassus wasn't interested in that. He ordered the Romans to march off into the desert in pursuit of the enemy army. Crassus advanced at a breakneck pace. He ordered his men to eat on the march and only let them stop for a few moments at any water sources. Crassus's subordinates continued to urge him to turn around, or at least stop at a water source for a couple of days, but he ignored their advice. After a time, some of...
only with the hindsight of knowing he dies, I'm like, maybe you should be listening to some of your subordinates, But, yeah, I don't know. Crassus seems a bit too not willing to get help or listen to others, which doesn't seem to be a good thing.
Of Crassus's scouts returned. They reported that there was a huge Parthian army very close, and that they were all on horseback. Crassus ordered his men to deploy in a long, thin line. This was a pretty standard tactic. Since the mounted Parthians would have mobility on their side, the Romans had to protect themselves against being flanked. Elongating the Roman line would force the Parthians to do the same, which would limit the size of any Parthian flanking maneuver. This is Ancient Warfare 101. But Crassus wasn't sure of himself. The fact that the Parthian army was all cavalry was throwing him for a loop. He changed his mind. As his men were mid-deployment, he ordered them to come back. He had them deploy in a hollow square. This would allow the Romans to fight on all sides, removing any danger of being flanked, or even surrounded. On paper, this isn't necessarily the worst idea in the world, but it's definitely unorthodox. It's one of those, it's so crazy it just might work ideas. Crassus's subordinates tried to talk him out of it, but his mind was made up.
Yeah, he doesn't seem willing to... Obviously, I don't know his entire military career. I've never really done much research on Crassus. It's just from what I'm getting of this particular campaign, he doesn't seem receptive to help or advice from others. He seems like a man who will only do what he sets his mind to and stick to it, which, I don't know, I think being open-minded and listening to others is, I think that is probably a good thing to have, especially when you're leading, but again, like I said, I've never led a military army, so obviously I'm just speaking from a place of ignorance. But yeah, I'm not getting the best impression of Crassus at this moment, I'm not gonna lie.
The Roman square advanced as one, until they caught sight of the Parthian army.
This really is like the predecessor of like the square formation that the Napoleonic era, because like before this we were covering Napoleon from Epic History TV and the infamous square formation and just how effective it is against cavalry. It was used against Napoleon in Waterloo. Napoleon used it against the Mamelukes and Egypt. Just like really great with like the weapons of guns, rifles, cannons. But here, the most they have is, like, in terms of, like, long distance battle is javelins and arrows. So we'll see if it's good, because in the Napoleonic era, it's great against cavalry. It's like the go-to, right? But in this older era of war, I guess we'll just see, right?
It turns out that the Roman scouts exaggerated a bit. The Parthian army wasn't that huge. In fact, it was considerably smaller than the Roman one. There were only 10,000 Parthians, facing off against 43,000 Romans. Most of the Parthian army was horse archers, with some armored heavy cavalry mixed in. The Romans were already in their little square, so the Parthian cavalry was unopposed as they immediately surrounded them. When they were in position, they began to rain arrows down on the Romans from all sides. Crassus responded by sending skirmishers forward to drive the horse archers away, but the Parthian arrows forced the skirmishers to retreat. The Parthians continued to pound the Roman square with missiles. Now, it's not quite as bad as it sounds. The Romans knew this was coming. They were shoulder to shoulder, and everybody was protected by their giant shields. Most ancient archers could burn through their supply of arrows in like 10 or 15 minutes, so the Romans just had to sit there and wait for this to happen. Then, they could close in with the enemy and fight on their terms. So they waited, and waited, and waited. The arrows did not stop. It turns out that the Parthians had brought a lot of arrows. Like,
Smart. We know Parthia becomes a pretty consistent enemy with Rome, especially during the Empire era, I believe. The Empire era. So yeah, Parthia remains kind of, basically an enemy of Rome for a while. And, that's funny. It's like, usually, I think they must have been aware, okay, usually, they try to be defensive so we can wear out our arrows and supplies. So here's the solution. Let's bring even more arrows than usual. And everyone cheered. Genius. He's a genius. Whoever came up with that idea. But yeah, now it's like, oh boy, what happens if, like, they just wear us out, right? Because we're just gonna keep defending until it's seemingly endless barrage, right?
a lot. Apparently they had a small army of camels with them, each weighed down with thousands of arrows. Their only job was to run back and forth, resupplying the horse archers. They basically had an infinite supply.
They literally have the infinite ammo cheat on. They turned on their infinite ammo cheat, and now the Romans are like, oh no, we were gonna wait until they ran out. What if they don't run out? Like, oh, that's hilarious.
This possibility never occurred to the Romans. Their shields still protected them from the worst of it, but a small percentage of the arrows inevitably slipped through the cracks. Another small percentage would hit a shield at exactly the right angle and go straight through the wood. Not very many Romans were being killed, but an alarming number were taking arrows to the arms or feet. In desperation, Crassus ordered the entire square forward. Maybe if they could get close enough, the Parthians would have to stop shooting and pull back. It didn't work. The arrows continued to fall. This was getting bad. Something needed to change. So Crassus ordered his son, Publius, to take the cavalry and a legion and break through the encircling Parthians. Publius gathered his men and charged. And it worked. The Parthian horse archers turned and ran. Publius pursued. But it didn't take long for Publius to make an unfortunate discovery. While retreating, the Parthian archers could turn a full 180 degrees on their horses and continue to shoot their arrows. This is called the Parthian shot, and it was a devastating tactic, especially in scenarios like this.
You know, I play this game called Mount and Blade Warband. You can see my television in the background. My PS4's there, and I play the PS4 version of Mount and Blade Warband. And when I'm playing solo, horse archery is just OP, because you can essentially, like, in a game that promotes, like, warfare and raising armies, you know, like, you can grind to a lot of levels fighting by yourself, and the safest and most effective way of doing that is playing as a horse archer. And like I circle around hundreds of enemies, shooting with an OP, like, with the most OP bow you can buy in the game, and you can just I've taken out, like, literally armies of hundreds solo, and like you can turn almost all the way back and shoot while they're pursuing you. So that just gave me a complete flashback of the tactics I use when I'm playing as a horse archer. So horse archery is OP when done right. It is an OP thing, guys, like, seriously.
But Publius and his cavalry ignored the arrows and kept up the momentum, chasing the Parthians until the rest of the battle vanished in the distance.
Yeah, I was afraid that was gonna happen. He's gonna stray too far, isn't he, and get surrounded, I'm assuming? I don't know anything about this battle. Like, Kings and Generals did not cover Crassus. So, yeah. This is completely new to me. I'm assuming he's gonna stray too far away and get jumped, right?
Then, the retreating Parthians were joined by another group, doubling their size. The Parthians swung around and attacked. It was all a setup. Publius realized his mistake too late. His small force was immediately surrounded, and the arrows began coming down faster than ever. The infantry was totally pinned down. Publius rallied the cavalry and charged. The Parthian heavy cavalry responded and intercepted them. The Parthians were armored, and the Romans were not. Publius's cavalry did their best, but it wasn't enough. Publius was badly wounded, and the cavalry retreated. They endured the Parthian arrows for a while longer, but eventually the arrows stopped, and the Parthian cavalry charged. Publius's men were in no condition to put up a fight. 5,300 Romans were left dead on the field, and another 500 surrendered to the Parthians.
Wow.
Publius ordered one of his men to kill him so that he wouldn't be taken alive. Crassus didn't know that any of this was happening. All he knew was that Publius had broken through, and that the Parthians had diverted some of their strength to deal with him. Then, a messenger arrived. He told Crassus that Publius was being overrun by the Parthians. For a time, Crassus was unable to make a decision. Finally, he ordered the entire square forward. He would march to Publius's aid. Crassus had no idea that his son was already dead.
Oh, that sucks.
As the Romans were getting ready to march, a Parthian horseman came forward. He started riding back and forth in front of the Roman line. He was carrying something, a spear. On the
end has to be his head, right?
End of the spear, there was a severed head. It was Publius.
Oh my goodness. These Parthians are wild, man. They are insane. They are wilding. Oh, Crassus, I'm so sorry.
The Romans had endured a lot, but this was a terrifying sight. They began to lose their nerve. A group of Romans broke away from the army and tried to fight through the encircling Parthians on their own, but the Parthian heavy cavalry intercepted them and cut them down. Then, the Parthians continued pounding the Romans with arrows. Finally, the sun started to set. The Parthians pulled back. They had rules against fighting at night, and besides, the Romans were on foot. They weren't going far. The Romans threw together a haphazard camp and collected their wounded. There were a lot of them. Crassus was inconsolable. He spent hours huddled on the ground, unable to move, mourning his son. He didn't have the heart to face his men. 2 of Crassus's legates came forward and told the army that they were taking command and that they had the full support of the rank-and-file centurions. I guess if you want to be technical, you could call this a mutiny, although Crassus didn't seem to care. The legate...
Yeah, the dude's son just died. Like, I don't have children by the way, so I don't understand, but I do know that I've heard a lot of people say, you know, once you have a kid, it changes you. Some people I've seen change for the better, and, you know, like, obviously there is a love. Not all parents love their kids, by the way, unfortunately. For instance, my father, I never knew my father. He kind of bailed as soon as I was born. So, you know, obviously not all parents love their children. But, you know, I've seen from families that aren't broken, I've seen, you know, parents just... There's a love that, you know, a parent has for their child, which is just strong, and just losing your kid, seeing their head, I imagine, on a freaking spear, like, at that point, what matters, like, you know, you're broken at that point, I'd imagine. So, I don't blame him, it's like, who cares, like, you know, so, yeah, just, poor Publius. I really like saying his name, Publius, but... Yeah, Crassus, though I don't have the brightest opinion of him at this current campaign, I know he accomplished stuff in his earlier life. I think he was responsible for, like, the Spartacus revolution, right? Or fighting against it. He wasn't a part of it actually fighting against Rome, but what I mean is I think he had a part to play there in stopping it. So he's obviously, he was accomplished in the past. It's just... this campaign in particular, it's not. He's made questionable decisions, though this battle was kind of the fault of his intelligence, because, you know, he chose this square thinking he was going to face a much larger army, but, you know, obviously a bad call, but you can kind of see why he would make it, right?
It's decided that the Romans would march straight through the night. The nearest town was Carrhae, which had walls and a Roman garrison. If they could reach Carrhae, they would be safe. They didn't bother taking down their camp. They just left it behind, along with anybody that wasn't strong enough to walk. Crassus tagged along, but didn't try to reassert his command. Nobody could see a thing in the darkness. It was a mess. People kept on imagining that the Parthians were attacking and sounding the alarm. Of the people that could walk, a ton were wounded, and after a while, they had a hard time keeping up. A whole bunch of wounded Romans were just abandoned on the march. It was bad. But by sunrise the next day, most of the exhausted survivors made it to Carrhae. The Parthians descended on the abandoned Roman camp. There were still a bunch of wounded there, and the Parthians killed them. Then, the Parthians fanned out all over the desert, looking for Roman stragglers, and there were a lot of them. Some had been abandoned on the march, and some had simply got lost in the dark. The Parthians found one group of 2,000 that was walking in the wrong direction. They captured as many as they could. The Parthian general figured out that Crassus and the rest of the army were in Carrhae, and went to negotiate. He told them that it would be in everyone's best interest if the Romans just left Mesopotamia. But just to be sure, he wanted a formal peace treaty, and he wanted Crassus to sign it. Crassus didn't want anything to do with this. He was a broken man. But the Roman army was either near or past mutiny, depending on your definition, and they just wanted to go home. They forced Crassus to go with the Parthians. A small group of Romans went with him. What happened next was very strange.
Whoa.
The Parthian general made an over-the-top display about how it was so undignified for a Roman general to be walking on foot. He ordered a horse brought in. The horse arrived, and it was wearing a very expensive golden bridle. Like, obnoxiously expensive. This was meant to somehow humiliate Crassus for him.
Yeah, I'm like, are you messing with him right now? Like, with the Seems like it's almost like a mockery, right?
wealth. The Parthian general told Crassus to get up on the horse. Crassus tried to politely decline.
Yo, Parthians, you've already won. Like, now he's there making a big deal about the horse. Just take the peace treaty. He's there.
But the Parthian general insisted. Crassus was like, okay. When he mounted the horse, the Parthian holding its reins started running back and forth erratically, smacking the animal and making it go nuts. Crassus was hanging on for dear life. The Romans stepped in. This was weird and undignified, and it had to stop.
This seems like they're just... Are they trolling him right now? I'm getting the impression they're trolling him. They're like, hey, we murdered your son, we've broken you. Let's laugh at you a little bit more now. Oh, the Parthians, man.
As they approached, somebody drew a sword. There was a brief struggle, and seconds later, Romans and Parthians were lying dead on the ground. Crassus had been thrown from the horse. Another Parthian came forward and drew his sword. He cut off Crassus's hand, and then his head.
That is... I imagine he died in battle. That was kind of a weird way to go. It's like, let me show up, alright, we're making peace. Whoa! On the horse, and then fall back, and then get killed. I almost kinda wanna laugh. That's so bad, I'm so sorry. It's just like, what a weird way to go, your final moments. Like, I imagine, like, a dignified death, like he was fighting, and then, like, he got slain. Here, that was a weird way to go. Poor Crassus, man. I'm sorry. You went out a really weird way.
Later, according to one account, the Parthians mocked Crassus's wealth one more time by melting down some gold and pouring it down the throat of the severed head.
Oh.
The Parthian general turned around and rode back east with his Roman prisoners. He picked one Roman and told him that from now on he would answer to the name of Crassus. He dressed his fake Crassus as a woman and hired a bunch of prostitutes to follow him around. He then grabbed more Romans and dressed them as lictors or bodyguards and had them follow this fake Crassus as well. He gave these fake lictors fake fasces, which normally represented the power of the Roman state. Affixed to the top of these fasces were the severed heads of other Roman captives. The Parthian general took this horrific procession on tour through Parthian territory.
Wow, Parthia's weird. They're weirder than I thought. Like, you know, like I said, I'm happy I've watched... Kings and Generals played this entire series off really... His Caesar series off very straight. Kind of told the facts. Didn't really add any of this weird stuff with Parthia. But what I like about Historia Civilis is that he kind of shows the absurdity of history at times. And just tells it. And it's like... It's weird. I'm like, what the heck? Like, that whole Crassus thing is just weird. No, this, I'm like, okay. Whatever you say, Parthians, you guys are... It was enough to beat them. They had to humiliate the Romans. Oh boy.
He called it Crassus's triumph. In the end, a Parthian army of 10,000...
Dang, man. These guys are ruthless.
Defeated a Roman army of 43,000. 20,000 Romans were killed, and another 10,000 were captured. The legion's eagle standards were also taken, which was an extra level of humiliation. At the time, it was one of the worst defeats in Roman history. Back in Rome, Crassus's death came as a shock. Politically, it changed everything. The Reform faction lost its most prominent financial supporter. Pompey was now the richest man in Rome, and within a year, he would be distancing himself from Caesar and aligning with the conservatives. Roman politics would never be the same.
Alright, okay, yeah, the audio kind of got bad there, and it just got quiet. I was like, is this my computer? No, I went back. It still sounds good. Wait.
ignored the arrow.
Okay, yeah, like that's just this video. That was not a very dignified way to go. Like my illusion of Crassus dying valiantly on battle, which I never confirmed, by the way, I just assumed, was completely ruined there, and I'm like, oh, okay, that was a wild. The last few minutes of this video was wild, but it was good to know, and now I guess we're going back to Caesar and Gaul next. So, yeah, that's a battle I've never learned about, so that was interesting to learn about. And I guess rip Crassus, you know, really had an awful end. Like, because it wasn't even any bit dignified, it was just humiliating. That poor guy, man. Well, we'll be learning about Vercingetorix next, so I guess I'll be seeing you all then. Bye, everyone.